going to start because we have 30 minutes to tell you about the future of Europe, which I think is not enough time. We've got two excellent guests today with me here. First of all, General Allen is what I would describe as a warrior scholar of like ancient West style. So also a diplomat as well. I mean, in his career, he's been a diplomat, a scholar, and a general. So that's incredible, including in Europe with NATO. And of course, Katie zu Guttenberg has been a policymaker in Germany at the highest level, defense minister, economy minister too, and also an entrepreneur in Europe, doing many of the things that many of you do here today. So this is great. I want to just start off with a baseline question. You know, this is like when you do one of those truth exams. I just want to ask you a yes or no question, which has been increasingly difficult to answer by American policymakers. So I just want yes or no from the two of you. Did Russia invade Ukraine?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So we've got some agreements here. Apparently, this is a very difficult question for the Undersecretary of Defense of the United States of America to answer. I watched the YouTube clip of him trying to answer. It was hilarious.
Not only for him.
Not only for him, yes, pretty much for much of the administration. Okay, so I want to start off with you, General Allen. What is the purpose of NATO, and does it serve American interests? And I don't want you to answer it in a value-laden, normative way. I want to hear a Machiavellian answer. Does NATO serve American national interests?
Absolutely it does, and it has since 1949 with the Washington Treaty. It has brought together the results of the post-war Europe into an arrangement with the United States leadership that not only provided for the security of Europe in the aftermath of the war as the Soviet machine aligned itself on the Iron Curtain, but it also created the environment within which the Marshall Plan could take root and create the economic progress that we have seen across Europe that has, in many respects, not just been in Europe, but it's been economic progress and prosperity that has been around the world. So NATO is the largest and I think the most successful military alliance in the history of humankind. And it is in America's vital interest to continue to support it and to be a functioning and contributing member of it.
If I was Stephen Bannon right now, I would follow up and say, but I heard a lot about European wealth and prosperity. How does it defend American?
American wealth has also prospered because of it. There's no question that the stability that NATO has brought to the global economy, the global political environment, has given America a great opportunity for prosperity and economic advance.
So the same question for you, Katie, but let's replace American with European or German. You know, take it both ways.
So it served us well, and it served us well because we knew, and here we have to be self-critical, because we knew that there is someone with an enormous military might who takes care of us if we're in trouble. There has been one moment when Article 5 was invoked, and it was invoked by the US. At that point, the allies were there to help.
That's right.
That was Afghanistan. We can argue about the sense and nonsense of the Afghanistan effort as such, but the Europeans were there and serving Americans' interest. And so, yes, it serves economic interests, but first of all, it's a security interest. And in that light, we have to see, okay, NATO has to be, in the course of history, coming from the late 40s, early 50s, has to redefine itself whenever the world is redefining itself as well. Currently, we are seeing seismic shifts, and some of them are invoked by the most important NATO ally. This is the European perspective right now. However, what we need to learn from a European perspective here is if we want to keep NATO alive, it's not enough just to complain that something new is being shaped from over here potentially, but we also have to accept that there has been, over years and decades now, General, complaints from this side of the Atlantic that Europe was taking a free ride, was not giving enough efforts to actually ramp up our part of the equation, and that has to change, and that is changing. So therefore, some of the things we've seen over the last few weeks and months have caused results. However, and we will discuss about that, other results we see are quite damaging, and damaging for American interests and damaging for European interests.
But let me come in very quickly. What KT has just said is extremely important. It has been an American complaint for a very long time that the European states individually and collectively have not spent enough ultimately on their own military readiness and also to contribute to the alliance readiness as well. And that's a valid complaint. And the Europeans have been gradually increasing that amount. It's still not nearly enough, but they've been gradually increasing that amount that has been expended. And that's frankly one of Donald Trump's principal objectives to NATO. In other words, if the United States is prepared to go to nuclear war with Russia to defend or to deter Russia or to defend Europe from Russia, his view would be they need to pay for the kind of capacity necessary for credible defense of the European continent. So this has been a problem all along, but it hasn't been a problem that is existential to NATO, because all of us together and the shared values of NATO really supersede any other rational alternative.
And we are not only talking about conventional warfare threats any longer. We're talking about cyber threats. We're talking about the potential of AI. We're talking about threats emerging from climate change, all the other things. And these are things that affect the US equally as all the other allies. So questioning NATO at this time of history right now is utterly reckless.
So let me ask you, General. President Trump has appointed a lot of unorthodox policymakers to his cabinet, particularly in your field of sort of defense, intelligence, and so on. What do you think about that? What is the purpose here?
Well, unorthodox would lead you to believe that they have an alternative ideology. Most of them are just unfit, ultimately, to have a senior position in the U.S. government, whether it's to take a position in sympathy for Bashar al-Assad, who's a genocidal maniac, or to have personal standards of conduct where that individual couldn't get a security clearance as a second lieutenant. I mean, we've got some real issues here, and I think Trump wasn't appointing people who had worldviews and ideologies that could contribute to a global view of geopolitics and geostrategic relationships. He appointed people who will be loyal to him. We need to get ready for this in America, that most of our senior leadership now are going to be more loyal to him than they're going to be loyal to the Constitution of the United States. And I swore that oath for 45 years. I'd give my life for the Constitution. And we recently had a conversation that was surfaced by the President about the new potential chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who supposedly, in recommending him ultimately for this new position after C.Q. Brown was relieved of his position as the current chairman, this individual put on a MAGA hat. This is Trump's story. Put on a MAGA hat and said to him, "I will kill for you, sir." Now that should be disqualifying. Anyone who will kill for the President of the United States as opposed to be prepared to give their life in support of the Constitution is unfit to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
All right. Unanticipated applause. That's great. Now, both of you have said that Europe has weaknesses and has to step up. But I want to ask you a direct question. Russia is obviously the threat. I mean, it's invaded Ukraine. Can Europe defend itself against Russia given current capabilities and, more importantly, given Russia's performance thus far in Ukraine? How would we assess this? And I mean, Katie, you were the defense minister of Germany, so you have also the ability to answer the question. And General, and you literally led troops in NATO.
So as of today, the clear answer is no. We would still need the, let's say, what we would call collective deterrence, which is the core element of NATO. And we still need people on both sides of the Atlantic, also following up what you have just said, who have the intellectual depth and historical knowledge of what that alliance, but also what outcomes of aggression could mean for any of the partners. And we've also been puzzled, the other side of the Atlantic, when we heard who is going to sit in which position. And I've had the chance to talk to a few of them during the Munich Security Conference, where, John, you were as well.
Yep.
And let's put it mildly, I was underwhelmed by their knowledge of the complexities we are facing right now. So is Europe capable of confronting a threat which is more than real currently? No, we are not. We might need, even if we invest now 3.5% GDP, and it's a reality right now, it's happening. It's even happening in Germany. You've heard the news last night. We are coming close to investments of €1 trillion in infrastructure, which is important for that part as well, also in the military. But it will take a few years to come to a coherence where we could say, well, if anyone over here decides I couldn't care less about the Europeans, Ukraine, or Russia, and my worldview is a worldview where we legitimize aggression, then we're standing in the rain over there. And that is something we need to keep in mind, and we come back to the first question. It cannot serve America's interests if Europe is going to implode. And that is something which will just play into the hands of the cynic in Moscow, and not even there.
Do you agree with that, General Allen, that today Europe would not be able to repel a Russian attack on the Baltics, let's say?
It's a nuanced question. The Russians, I think, have had taken enormous beating of their offensive warfighting capabilities. It'll be a number of years before they could mount a credible invasion of the NATO territory. But right now, we would have difficulty repelling it, if that's the case. And it's important to make the point that, and KT said it a moment ago, this environment of the 21st century, warfighting and conflict are interrelated in what we call multi-domain operations. The capacity to operate in space, in cyber, and in the traditional physical terrestrial environment, so multi-domain operations. And while for the moment, NATO is not engaged in physical combat and physical war against Russia, we are deeply engaged in conflict with Russia right now in the cyber domain. They are savaging our democracies. I spend a lot of time in one of my relationships with the private sector looking at the Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean cyber threats to the U.S. in general, but to our allies also as well.
You wrote a book on it.
Sorry?
You wrote a book on it.
Well, yes. And the point is that while the Russians have not invaded, they are constantly intruding into our cyber networks for reconnaissance purposes, to implant beacons, ultimately to attack strategic infrastructure or critical infrastructure, but they're also directly attacking our societies as well, seeking to separate us along racial lines or gender lines or religious lines as well. And it's 24 hours a day. I just flew in from Taiwan to here, and they're under constant cyber attack by the Chinese. So the Chinese and the Russians are at our throats every single day in cyberspace. And we, the Europeans and the Americans, have to be constantly shoulder to shoulder in repelling these attacks against the very essence of our societies. So can we defend ourselves today? I think the Russians have very limited offensive physical capability to wage war against NATO. But they are fully capable of waging war against NATO and our democratic partners on both sides of the Atlantic in cyberspace. And they are very aggressive in that regard. And they'll affect our elections, they'll affect our children, they'll affect our school systems, et cetera. And we have to work at it together.
So there's two reasons that I'm moderating this panel. I didn't even introduce myself, which is fine. I haven't done anything close to what you gentlemen have. But the first reason is that I have an unorthodox perspective, if you will. I think Jamie's asked me to moderate because I come from a country that both US and Germany have bombed over the last 20 years. One of the few. So I'm going to ask some uncomfortable questions now. KT, you're saying that Germany is ready to step up, Europe is ready to step up. General Allen, you're saying that's necessary. But there is that old saying from Lord Ismay that I know both of you know, that NATO's there to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and Germans down. The old 1950 saying, first chair of NATO. There is a benefit in some ways for the US globally from Europe not necessarily having grown out of its geopolitical adolescence, perhaps. At least that's a theory. So if Germany steps up, could there be a future, and this is something that President Trump is, as you mentioned, pushing Europe into, perhaps haphazardly, is there a danger 10, 15, 20 years from now where the two entities have a divergent view on a geopolitical matter of critical perhaps national security to both?
That risk is always given, but getting back to that infamous sentence, currently we have a situation that takes the US out, brings the Russians more or less a rather free perspective into Europe, which is not a very nice one, and which finally brings the Germans to a level that they take responsibility. They've been asked for decades now also by their other European partners. We've been shying away from that because of our history, but for way too long. And we're talking about the third, fourth largest economy in the world. So Germany needs to lead in that regard and needs to take that, or co-lead, let's put it that way, together with a French president who is an outgoing president, a lame duck at home, but the only one who actually phrased a greater European strategy, together with the Brits. Yes, we still have Brexit, but we also have a necessity right now to form certain coalitions in Europe which don't resemble the core EU idea as such. But that idea has had its flaws as well. So we've been more or less strangled by the principle of unanimity when it came to foreign affairs and security questions. So we will see groups that are willing to coil, but also a temptation by Russia, unfortunately currently by this administration over here, by China, to widen existing rifts within the European Union and to weaken that very part of the continent.
Exactly.
And again, that doesn't serve anyone's interest, at least not anyone's interest within the alliance.
So you're saying almost, yes, maybe 10, 15 years ago from now there's a divergence, but it's almost a worthy risk for the next 10 years. Europe needs to get stronger, better at defending itself, and more integrated.
But to follow up on that, we've had an example where it already worked, and it was the euro. So the euro was not implemented by all, at that point, 21 member states. Today we have 28 minus 1 after Brexit. And we've had 17. And it was a concept that worked. So 17 now. So it was the growing thing, and the growing thing that formed into a concept where we say it's a European concept, and whoever wants to join can join a group of, let's call it the willing. And that could be translated into defense. It could be translated in all the other issues we are interested in, for instance, from an investment point of view, or other things. So at the end, I think it will strengthen the European idea if it's meant as an open invitation for others. And that's not a new idea. We've had it in the 90s already, and then we were living our romantic dream of embracing everyone.
And again, I don't think anyone contends that. The question for General Allen perhaps is, but is there a downside to that from an American perspective in some distant future or maybe near future?
U.S. interests in the world do not align solely on Europe. There are three very large areas in which the United States has really distinct national interests and where our values are also at play. And of course, Europe is at the heart of it, and it has been, in many respects, the epicenter of American military commitment. But we also have very deep ties in the Middle East. The defense of Israel, for example, is an extraordinarily important, and we'll talk about that later today on another panel, extraordinarily important priority to America, but also the United States has very deep relations with many of the Arab states as well. So stability in the Middle East is a vital national interest of the United States. And then, of course, increasingly, the United States is very concerned about Chinese aggressiveness in East Asia. You know, there's a long time, there was this sort of a racist view that the Asian populations could not adopt democracy. And in fact, some of the best functioning democracies on the planet with very strong economies are in East Asia. And America has security relationships with almost all of them. The Chinese are pushing hard on every one of them. So the United States has great interest in being part of the European and transatlantic community. And there was an advisor to Angela Merkel recently who said a couple of years ago that we, the European members of NATO, have to step up in our interoperability and our embrace of modernity in terms of our modernization of our forces so that the United States can still fulfill its own responsibilities in the Middle East to secure that region, but also increasingly with the U.S. attention in East Asia. So this is not a zero sum. We're either in Europe or out of Europe. We're in Europe, and we're also in the Middle East, And we're also in East Asia, and increasingly in East Asia, because as the Chinese continue to increase their capabilities and their nuclear capabilities dramatically, and their economic pressure on our allies, the United States has got to be there. I mean, the nominee for the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy the other day, just yesterday, I think, when he was testifying in his confirmation hearing, said something to the effect of, we probably need to deprioritize Taiwan as a vital national interest because the strengthening of the Chinese military capability and the decay or deterioration of American military capability means that we should not make this a vital national interest for which we would go to war with China. I mean, my God, if I were on Taiwan right now, I'd be packing. So the issue...
Well, TSMC is.
Yeah, well, TSMC just made a $100 billion commitment to the United States. And they saw the writing on the wall. When I was just there, President Lai announced a 3% spending. Now, he said yesterday, the Undersecretary nominee, that they should go to 10%. Now, I'm sure their hair is standing straight on end in Taipei right now on that matter. But these are really complex issues. The U.S. is very interested in the transatlantic community. It's very interested in the long-term survival and long-term health of NATO. But it's not the only thing against which vital national interests of the United States are at stake, and that we're willing to go to war over.
And where we, from a European perspective, again, should be willing to cooperate. And that's our tectonic shift. So
Right.
it's not all about the European borders, securing European borders. If you talk about a functioning future of NATO, it is all about being willing to work together in other parts of this world when it comes to defending our shared interests.
Exactly.
And we've been hesitant when it came to that, with the exception of Afghanistan, and with the exception of helping out a little bit now also in Asia, but certainly not enough. But that needs to be done, and that's something we need to ramp up as well.
Okay, so in your career, General Allen, you've obviously led men and women into war. KT, you've defended, German interests. I do something far pettier than that. I try to predict the policy of men such as yourself so that my clients can make money. That's what I do. Like, I work in finance. That's it. So the euro is on fire. We had two days consecutively of more than 1% moves in the euro, which is, for a large currency with lots of volume, shocking. This isn't the Brazilian real. And I don't know how many people in this community, the tech community, know, but European banks have wiped the floor with tech stocks in the US since January 2022. How many of you know that? European banks have outperformed US tech. Crazy. Who would have thought? So I want to ask one question. I mean, I think a lot of the enthusiasm over the last 6 weeks is because there's this view that there's like a pincer maneuver. On one side you have Trump, on the other side you have Putin, and that it's finally gotten the Europeans to be serious about domestic structural reforms, fiscal spending, and so on. And every time I go to a conference like this, the sort of glib, annoying, cliche question is, yes, but if I need to call Europe, who do I call? Right? I mean, you've heard this, Katie. This is constant refrain, like, at American Anglo-Saxon events, like. Is Chancellor Merz going to be able to step into that role and pick up that phone? Is he going to embrace it? Is he going to take it? And is Europe going to allow him to do it? And maybe more importantly, is Germany, is the conservative Germany focused on every Pfennig, so to speak, going to allow Chancellor Merz to become that person?
Regarding the latter, yes.
Wow, cool.
But you would still need at least 3 phones. And
it's okay. iPhones let you,
one's directed to Berlin. One is, for the next 2 years, still directed to Paris. And one needs to be directed, with all flaws connected to that, to Brussels. And if you have a 4th phone, think about Warsaw.
Yes. Yep.
But don't fall into the trap that you need to please or somehow pamper or divide all 27. The temptation to divide is always given. And it's certainly given from over here. And Steve Bannon will keep hopping around in Europe and tell all the guys over there, use social media, nationalize, be a proper populist. And that's the best future you can have, which is an illusion.
But that's difficult to do when Brussels is also giving you billions of dollars for defense. And so I think one of the problems Stephen Bannon is going to have when he runs around Europe is that he's running around Europe with, like, what, a Twitter account? Whereas Brussels is now running around Europe with billions of dollars for defense. So if I'm Viktor Orban,
Yeah, but that's exactly what I've just said before. If we don't wait for those who could block a European decision, but take our decisions within a group that is capable and willing to step forward, then we are at a new level,
That's right.
which will make us safer and will also serve American interests.
I agree with that, absolutely.
well, and I think that, I mean, for what it's worth, I think my view is that pressure makes diamonds at the end of the day. And perhaps Europe has been coddled too long with perhaps too benevolent of an America.
Yes, it has, definitely. And pressure makes diamonds. It makes diamonds as long as it's understood that this is something where you don't have to go further just for the sake of securing your own weird deal. So putting pressure on Europe to say you have to take care of what's happening east of you more and more by yourself is fair enough. But at the same time, calling something a peace deal, which is nothing else than legitimizing aggression, and combining that with a rare earth exploration deal and calling that peacekeeping
Right.
or peace saving is probably the euphemism of last week.
All right. Two more really quick questions. We have 3 minutes left, but we have both of you here. This is a panel on Europe, and Market is certainly enthusiastic about Europe right now, but I want to get your global perspective as well. First of all, Russia. Really quickly, I mean, 30 seconds. What is the future of Russia-West relationship? Let's say this deal gets through, whatever. We have a ceasefire, as you said. We apply some sort of a deal with Ukraine where it becomes Israel of Eastern Europe. I'm assuming that's where it's going to go. You know, the security guarantee is that it's going to be armed to the teeth. I highly doubt we will actually offer any security guarantees, whether it's Trump or not. But the question is, what then? You know, where does the Russia-West relationship go? What do we have to wait for?
Well, the Russian intent is ultimately to roll back the gains that NATO had made. It has been very clear several times that the Eastern European states that joined NATO in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union created a security environment that in the end was intolerable to Russia. Well, that's just baloney, because all of those states had lived under the Soviet yoke with the Russian boot on their necks for generations. And by the way, they wanted to be free, and they wanted access to an economic environment that under which they could flourish. NATO expanded to the east. They were incorporated. They're safer now, with the exception of Orban, perhaps in Hungary. But they're safer now. They're more secure now. And they are, in many respects, that because of NATO and because of the EU. Putin's intent is to dismantle as much of that as he possibly can. His intent is to expand the Russian Empire once again. He has been successful in employing force to change the borders of European countries and countries in Central Asia multiple times since the 90s. And if we give him a peace deal, as KT said, if we give him a peace deal that rewards him with 4 provinces of eastern Ukraine, he will have been successful once again in using military force ultimately to change the borders of Europe. Why would he stop then after he has rearmed himself? Now, Dmitry Peskov just said the other day, the spokesman for the Kremlin, we are happy, I'm almost quoting now, we are happy to see that all American foreign policy seems to be aligning with us. And Hegseth, just 2 days ago, ordered the U.S. Cyber Command to stop offensive cyber operations against the Russians and to stop offensive cyber planning against the Russians. It's like going into a fist fight with your hands tied behind your back, because the Russians and us are locked in mortal cyber combat every single day. Now, I don't know where Russia's going to go. Russia's intent is to dismantle the security architecture that has sustained peace in Europe for many, many years. If this administration signs up to that, I'm worried. But this administration is only going to go for 4 years, and we'll see what comes after that. And the stink that's left in the American nostrils over Russia over the last several years will not be gone by then.
I agree with everything John has said right now. I think there's another point important here. Fully agree, John. Another point's important here. There's that obviously grand strategy to have a new Nixon and China moment, but just with Russia now. So means make a deal with Russia and you get them out of the arms of China. That is an utter illusion.
Absolutely.
Insanity.
It won't happen.
Absolutely.
It won't happen. There's no reason for Putin to sacrifice what he has just built over the last few years, yes, as a junior partner to Beijing, but he will keep that open because he says in 3 years that guy in DC might be gone, and I might play his game for a while right now, take Moldova in between, maybe also Georgia, because nobody will lift a finger. Europe will not be capable of doing so. Washington will not be willing of stepping in. And does this make a safer world? Definitely not.
I think it also ignores the obvious historical context of that Nixon flip, which was that Soviet Union and China had a literal war.
They did.
69.
Yeah.
They did.
So, gentlemen, thank you so much. Hopefully we cleared up some things. Lots of applause. That was awesome. Thank you so much.